All right, this is supervisor training, running a shift, and we're going to talk about the business principle of managing labor. I didn't really value this until I watched a TED Talk about it in ways that there was a glass ceiling for women that's not there for men, and traditionally, and some of the missing training pieces that go into that glass ceiling. And one of those things in terms of training deficits for females in the workplace has to do with not understanding and not being able to articulate the ways, like when we apply our genius to solve problems, understanding that when we're part of a business, our goal is to protect the financial goals of that business, right? So if you're part of a 501c3, it's going to be different. But if you're part of a business, unless you're in that sector, you're going to be in business. And so it's really important to understand that this is something you need to be aware of and sort of to process that as you make choices. So labor is just one of those pieces. Like, what are the financial goals of the organization? And every organization has fixed costs and variable costs. And fixed costs are things like rent. That doesn't change. It goes depending on your contract. Ours increases by a certain percentage every 5 years or every year. But generally it's pretty static, right? Whereas something like labor, which is how much we spend on staffing, is a variable cost, right? So that's something that every single day we decide how much we're spending on that. And variable costs there's quite a few of them that you have touch points with as a supervisor, but labor is probably the biggest one. And my goal as a leader is to make sure that I don't want the question of how much we're spending on people to be a concern in terms of you working, right? If you're a supervisor, if you're full-time, especially if you have bills to pay, I don't want you cutting yourself. Sebastian, when he was like 3 and 4, would like cry every time we would talk about this at home, because he'd be like, "Mom, don't cut anybody. I know it's raining, but don't cut anyone." We were just like, oh my gosh, how many times do we have to have this conversation? Mommy's not an axe murderer. Mommy just doesn't want 5 people standing around when the store is already clean. So she's going to send out a text message that says, "Hey, does anyone want to go home?" And that's really all there is to running labor, to managing labor, is just be aware that, be conscious of, okay, how many people are serving customers and needed to serve customers? And if you have more than that, we always have projects. I mean, we make what we sell, right? So there's always things to do, but there are quite a few opportunities where you can say, "Hey, I don't think we need this person for another 2 hours. We're pretty good. So, hey, do you want to go home early?" And what's so funny is, for me, I'm very self-conscious and be like, hey, I don't want to ever infringe on anyone's ability to pay bills. I hear all the time about people who like get scheduled by their boss, and then their boss just cuts them all the time, and so they can't make a living wage. And so like for me, I'm like super anxious. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't ever want to like be up in that space as an employer. But usually we're employing students, and people are like, "Thank you so much for letting me go home. I have a test tomorrow. I'd really like to study for it." So please don't make assumptions about whether or not someone wants their hours or not. When it comes down to it, just ask. We do ourselves a disservice all the time with that cognitive dissonance of like assuming what other people want and need, instead of just asking questions and being like, "Hey, it's raining. Does anybody want to go home?" Like, who cares, right? We can do deep cleaning projects. The drains really need to be cleaned, but we just want to know, like, what are your values right now? And people will tell you. They'll be like, "Hey, I totally don't mind going home early." So bingo, there you go. You're managing labor. Send that person home early. If you're tired, ideally I don't want you cutting yourself, because you're the one that I positioned to protect things like driving sales and managing labor and all of these really important tenets and dynamics of running a shift, so that it's like a healthy place for humans to be. So ideally I want you there. But if things are under control and you're exhausted, hey, yeah, you can go home. If there's someone else there, if there's another supervisor who can run things, yeah, catch yourself. That's totally fine. I want you to take care of yourself. So that's just an intro to managing labor. We have other principles. I'll introduce you to the 15 per hour principle at some point. But this is your intro to what does it mean to manage labor. And managing labor is just being conscious of the fact that how many people are in the store has an impact on our variable costs and therefore on how profitable we are as a business. And so there's no need to keep people on who don't need to be there. And so we're just going to use this as an intro to starting that journey of figuring out what does that actually mean and how do we apply it.